Welcome to my channel. This is Captain Binoy Varakil, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph's College, Devgiri, Kozhikode. We continue the lecture series on Accidental Death of an Anarchist by Dario Fo. In this lecture, we discuss the politics of farce. Carlo Goldoni, the 18th century Venetian playwright, wrote in his autobiography that he was born under the star of comedy, and Dario Fo could make a comparable claim. He brought to his theatre an innate talent for fun, a boundless inventiveness, a taste for the nonsensical, a gift for zany observation, a love of whimsy, a fantasy at home in the realms of the absurd, a wayward glance at the affairs of men and women that could have made him the equal of the great writers of pure farce at any stage of theatrical history. However, as he wrote in a study of the Italian comic actor Toto, no critic should attempt a historical or, above all, critical analysis of the technique of an actor if the actor in question does not have a poetic, because it is in the themes through which it is developed that technique acquires breadth and meaning, becoming style. Fo, both as actor and author, possesses the style, the technique, and the theory and philosophy of theatre, which together constitute a poetic. It's true that his unbounded instinctive creativity is often at odds with his poetic, but his constant aim is to shape and structure his comic gifts so as to forge a new kind of theatre which combines boisterous laughter with a rage at injustice. In the process, he has become one of the leading writers of political theatre of our age. However, paradoxical it might seem for a writer whose subject was politics, farce was his preferred medium. But a wholly original style of farce, which could be termed didactic farce. Most of the big political farces for which Fo is now best known were written and performed in the years following his break with bourgeoisie theatre in 1968. But if that year many new theatrical companies emerged all over Europe to stage political theatre in which they proclaimed their dedication to Marxism and the proletariat, the difference was that 1968 was for Fo not a starting point but a turning point in an already successful career. He had already served a lengthy apprenticeship in theatre and given full proof of his abilities both as actor and writer. From the outset, farce was his favorite genre. At his debut as author with the 4 one-act farces linked under the umbrella title Thieves, Mannequins, and Nude Woman, he told an interviewer, "I want to rehabilitate farce." Theatre critics have adopted the habit of writing that an unsuccessful comedy declines into farce. Now, I believe that farce is a noble and modern genre of theatre. These plays were premiered in 1958 At the time when in Paris Eugene Ionesco, Arthur Adamov and Samuel Beckett were using farce to stage intellectual drama. Farce, long despised by critics as vulgar entertainment, had come to be viewed in the post-war period as the dramatic vehicles best suited for the expression of a philosophic outlook known simply as the absurd, a philosophy which gave voice to the sense of world weariness, of blackness, of futility, of pessimism over humanity, which were widespread in Europe after the final defeat of Nazism and Fascism. When his work first appeared, various critics hailed Fo as the Italian Ionesco, but he dissociated himself from this judgment and proclaimed that his farce belonged to an older popular tradition. The others were writers of the avant-garde, therefore in his eyes elitists playing for a small audience of intellectuals. He never had any sympathy with the avant-garde. From the beginning he wished to be numbered among writers in the popular tradition. This adherence to a popular culture, where the word popular does not have its acquired English meaning, but its original sense of belonging to the peoples as distinct from the upper classes, is indispensable to any understanding of Fo's theatrical beliefs. Although he developed complex views on what constitutes such theatre and how it differs from bourgeoisie theatre, he first stumbled onto it because it was a style of theatre that Reim family had always practiced. The second program of one-act farces, Comica Finale, which he and Franca Reim staged in 1958, were drawn from sketches and outline plot which the Reim family company had been performing for popular audiences as they toured from venue to venue in northern Italy. The tendency to find inspiration in the past, to be a respecter of theatrical tradition and not an anarchic iconoclast, a theatrical conservative rather than an experimentalist, was to be a constant in Fo's career. However radical and revolutionary were his politics in matters theatrical, Dario Fo can be viewed as a conservative, a man who by preference inhabits tradition. The characters on whom he most modeled himself after 1968 were two great comic figures, the medieval Giulare and the Harlequin from Commedia dell'arte. The word Giulare can be translated as jester, provided it's not taken in the sense of court jester, but in the sense of the all-round entertainer who performed to the people in the public places of the cities. The figure makes his first appearance in one of Fo's earliest plays, Archangels Don't Play Pinball, when Lanky tells Blondie that his trade is to have people make a fool of him. Do you remember who the Giulare was? He asks. When she replies that he made kings laugh, Lanky agrees, but adds that since there are no more kings, he is happy to make his friends in the bar laugh. After 1968, Fo declared his plan to become the people's jester, and there is something of the jester and even more of the harlequin in the maniac in Accidental Death. The jester became the narrator performer in Mr. Buffo. In the tradition he chose, Fo awarded pride of place to the lesser figures, the clowns, the jesters, the vaudeville entertainers, the variety artists, writers of farce, but above all to those who spoke to and for the people. To this tradition Fo added the spice of satire and of the use of the grotesque for satirical purposes. There was an element of very gentle satire in those early one-act farces, but that element grew stronger during his so-called bourgeoisie period in the 1960s. During that time, his plays were cast as comedy rather than farce. The assumption has always been that farce is frivolous and escapist, that it relies exclusively on the mechanism of plot, that its humor derives from relentless pace and momentum, that it stages comic debacles and fiascos but casts no light on life, that it has no credibility or value outside its own closed world, and that even in that world it requires a high level of suspension of belief. Comedy, on the other hand, has always been viewed as having a sophistication lacking in farce, since it contains some form of character development and offers some form of intellectual challenge beneath the light-hearted romp. Comedy was then accorded a respectable place in a hierarchy of dramatic forms below tragedy, but well above mere farce. Fo challenged this order, but in his bourgeoisie period, comedy was his medium. In any case, the distinction between the two genres is delicate and ethereal. For Fo, there was little real break between comedy and farce. The choice of writing a comedy involves the choice of a more complex structure than that of farce. While the farce is based from beginning to end on a theatrical mechanism which employs a single device, comedy has a structure articulated according to the storyline, so the devices can be multiple. Fo never eschewed slapstick humor, either in comedy or farce. His plays all contain passages of raucous, rumbustious knockabout, of surreal fancy, of outrageous fantasy, which serve no purpose either in terms of plot or politics. Even in his most earnestly political period, he found it hard to discipline his own inventiveness when he discovered that certain scenes aroused delight or laughter. He was happy to provide a good night out, even when he wished also to develop some idea on the political situation of his own day. The 1961 play, He Who Steals a Foot is Lucky in Love, is an attack on corruption in the building trade at a time when the award of public contracts in Italy was arousing suspicion, but discussions between constructors are interrupted by moments when they squirt drinks into each other's faces. However, the fact that his plots concerned public situations meant that Italy's censors followed his development with close interest. At the time, all scripts had to be submitted to Rome for approval, but this move was futile in the case of a writer like Fo, who changed his texts continually during rehearsals and even during the run. Outraged censors took to attending his performances with little torches which they used to peer at the approved texts they had in their hands, and to note any change from dialogue spoken on stage. They were especially upset by a play entitled He Had Two Pistols and White and Black Eyes in 1960, in which Dario played both the part of a priest who has lost his memory and a bandit on the run. The action unfolds in a psychiatric hospital run by doctors dressed as clerics, a situation where the senses interrupted rightly as an image of Italy governed by the Christian Democrats. The image of insanity of a world upside down recurs in Fo's theatre in Accidental Death of an Anarchist. The maniac is the standard bearer of sanity and logic. Satire is of the essence in Fo's Politics of Theatre. The irony or ridicule which are intrinsic to satire remove all solemnity from its target, leaving the emperor with no clothes and therefore undeserving of respect. To say that the leaders of the Soviet Union in the days of Stalin were cruel and hypocritical is merely an attack. To portray them, as does George Orwell in Animal Farm, as pigs who lead the revolt of the other animals only to assume themselves all the privileges of the humans they had ousted, is satire at its highest. Satire is rarely refined, gentle, or sophisticated, but can be violent, brutal, pitiless, or even tragic. Fo expressed his admiration for Jonathan Swift's bitter satire, a modest proposal where the writer suggested that the problem of poverty and hunger in Ireland could be relieved by the reintroduction of cannibalism. The children of the poor, Swift pointed out in his satire, were well fed and healthy until about the age of 3, when their mothers stopped breastfeeding them. After that, food being short, they tended to grow more sickly and unhealthy. Now, suggested Swift, suppose that we sell these infants to the wealthy diners in England and France, who could be persuaded to regard infant flesh as a delicacy. The families would thus receive some form of income. They would be freed of a burden they could not support, while the children themselves would not have to put up with the privations and misery of poverty. Fo regarded this satire as among the most perfect ever penned and used it to illustrate his central point. He was short with those who objected to violence or even obscenity in satirical writing, provided they were not ends in themselves. He had no truck with gratuitous violence and no liking for the merely lascivious, but if they served the purpose of seizing attention, of making people concentrate on wider point, these means could be accented. In a one-act play, The Beau's Funeral of 1969, he focuses on workplace deaths in Italy. To drive home his point, a butcher, complete with knives and axe, appears at the end of the action, holding in his arms a baby goat which he is about to slaughter. In the debate, Fo asks his spectators to consider why they are horrified at the sight of the slaughter of an animal and so indifferent to the killings which occur routinely in the industrial process. The goat was not injured. For Fo, satire, a real satire, is part of the mindset which produces tragedy. Without the sense of tragedy, satire is mere caricature or the relaxed jokiness which will allow the supposed object of, for example, cartoon satire to request of the cartoonist copies of the work in which he is supposedly slated. A good-hearted caricature which lampoons a politician by giving him a big nose or floppy ears is not satire but fluffy humor. It is nearly a mechanical constant where the satirical form does not have tragedy as its counterpart. The whole thing is transformed into clowning. Tragedy as drama of hunger, as terror and refusal of violence in all senses, the problem of human respect, the problem of dignity and of the quality of life, the problem of the relationship with death, the problem of love, of sexuality. This is the real catalyst of comic satire. This combination of seemingly tasteless satire and tragedy reaches its highest point in accidental death of an anarchist. To make a farce out of a tragedy which cost an innocent man his life, in which the people who were responsible for that death were the forces of law and order, is an unusually bold act. Fo is not plainly laughing at the death of the unfortunate Pino Pinelli, but he does not shy away from arousing laughter as a means of compelling people to meditate, reply on the human responsibilities for that death. Farce seemed to him the most effective means of provoking thought. On more than one occasion, he said that his aim was to provoke laughter with anger. It's a unique combination. There is no shortage of playwrights who have used theatre as a forum for the debate of political subjects. Perhaps the greatest of political playwrights of the 20th century was the German Bertolt Brecht. But while there are comic scenes in Brecht, his plays cannot be described as either comedy or farce. The irresistible rise of Arturo Ui, 1957, but written in 1941, is a savage satire on the rise of Hitler, where the Hitler figure is a small-time thug in Chicago, where flatters and deceives fellow gangsters until he has attained power, at which point he has them murdered. One of the most comic scenes shows Arturo taking lessons from an actor who has fallen on hard times and who teaches him how to march, parade himself in the public, gesticulate and deliver oratory. Brecht preferred drama to comedy, but developed a theory of alienation effect which was designed to prevent spectators from becoming so involved in the fiction they were watching that they lost the detachment needed to allow them to judge the politics debated in the play. Fo too thought deeply about this problem, but while he was deeply influenced by Brecht, he was also critical and believed that popular theatre and farce already provided the means to prevent this level of undesirable involvement. He had no intention of producing high-minded, tedious theatre which could not hold people's attention. Entertainment, enjoyment, pleasure were among the goals of theatre, and it was certainly his intention to provide them as well, but escapist theatre, the equivalent of the TV sitcom theatre which aimed to purvey only thoughtless entertainment, was not for him. Popular theatre of whatever kind, he noted, had an inbuilt mechanism which gave the aware playwright the chance of attaining alienation effect, or the detachment which stopped undue absorption in a pure fiction. The mechanism is the absence of the fourth wall, that invisible barrier which divides stage from stalls. The fourth wall was the imaginary divide across which there could be no conversation. In this tradition, actors remained in part as King Lear or Falstaff, never engaging in debate with the paying public. In popular theatre, this convention was not respected. In music hall, for example, performers would engage in repartee with people in front rows. In pantomime, the principal actors would emerge at the end of the play to read out names of groups in attendance that night or to do a stand-up routine. Fo used this freedom in his theatre. In addition, he believed that farce was a device which prevented catharsis. The term catharsis first appears in the discussion of tragedy in Aristotle's Politics, written around 330 BC. The exact meaning has been subject to endless debate, but the most common interpretation is that catharsis is a medical metaphor whose meaning is broadly cleansing. A play, in other words, arouses certain sentiments, notably pity and fear, with the aim of purging and eliminating them from the intellectual and emotional systems of spectators. For this very reason, Fo was docile to any technique that attained the effect of catharsis. In one of his discussions with the audience after a performance of Accidental Death of an Anarchist, he said, "The people does not use the dramatic methods of the aristocracy, the one which grabs at heart and guts, but attempts to get there by a violent moment of laughter, because laughter really does remain at the bottom of the mind, leaving sediment which cannot be wiped off, because laughter helps avoid one of the worst dangers, which is catharsis. That is, whenever someone cries, he frees himself of pain. There is no need to add that if there really is a divide between aristocratic theatre and the people's comic theatre, it has to do with the comic spirit of the one as against the pompous seriousness of the other." Now, the fact that this play contains a grotesque element is quite deliberate. We do not wish to free from indignation people who come along. We say so at the end. We want their anger to stay inside them, to remain there and not be let go. We want it to become active. We want to force people to reason about the time we find ourselves in, and we want them to carry all this forward into the struggle. Fo's aim was quite the reverse of catharsis. His theatre sought to provoke debate, to arouse feelings, to challenge received ideas, and invite people to consider new points of view. His audience was invited to take part in a political struggle, a term much in vogue in those troubled years. Dario Fo was advocating Marxist revolution, and it is no service to him to dilute the beliefs he held in those years. As a theatre maker, he had no desire to hold people's interest just for the duration of a show, only to see them forget all that had been presented to them once they put on their coats and exited into the night. His desire was that they left the theatre changed. Laughter is, in this view, a mechanism for triggering thought. Dario was fond of quoting Molière to the effect that while tragedy was emotionally comforting, laughter was defiant. Laughter is the identifying mark of humanity, since in laughter the human being becomes fully conscious of his own potential, of his individuality, and of his ability to assert his autonomy from convention and rule. Laughter denotes a critical awareness. It signifies imagination, intelligence, and a rejection of all fanaticism. In the scale of human evolution, we have first Homo sapiens, then Homo faber, and then finally Homo ridens. And this last is always the most difficult to subdue or make conform. Part of the reason for Dario Fo's admiration of Vladimir Mayakovsky, the Russian poet of Bolshevik Revolution, who ended up committing suicide in dismay at the cost of Soviet government, was that he shared with him a common vision of the potential of theatre. Fo edited a collection of Mayakovsky's writings, which included the following quotation: "Since I consider theatre to be an arena capable of reflecting political debates, I try to find a form capable of resolving these problems. First of all, I state that theatre is an arena, and secondly, a matter of performance, that is once again a joyful polemical arena." Fo added his own comment, which may be taken as a statement of his belief. A theatre then to awaken consciousness, not to amuse them, to stimulate doubt and discussions, not to perpetrate commonplaces, a theatre to which I feel extremely close, one directly linked to reflection, to the political analysis of society, and one which takes its inspiration from it to modify it by means of the fantastic, the ironic, the grotesque, the very forms of theatre. Now with this we come to the end of this lecture on the politics of farce. In the next lecture we will be discussing another very important topic on Dario Fo's theatre, and thank you very much for listening.